Welcome. In this video, we'll briefly discuss another type of associative learning known as operant conditioning. So we'll explain briefly what occurs during operant conditioning and identify the areas of the brain that may be involved with operant conditioning. So thinking back to a Psych 100 class, operant conditioning can also be called instrumental learning. So operant conditioning is where a response that is followed by a reinforcement or a punishment is either strengthened or weakened depending on the consequence. So you have a behavioral response, and if it's reinforced, it is strengthened. That behavior is more likely to occur. On the other hand, if you have a response and it's followed by a punishment, that response is weakened or it makes it less likely to occur. And again, you're making an association between the behavioral response and the consequence that follows it, whether that's a reinforcement or a punishment, okay? And yes, there's much more details to operant conditioning, but for the sake of this class, we're just going to remind ourselves of the basics and then go into very briefly what may be going on in the brain. So here again, you have an animal in a maze, and if they are reinforced with little Fruit Loops here, they are more likely to go to that arm of the maze the next time. On the other hand, if they're punished with a little shock here, which also involves some fear learning, they're less likely to go to that arm of the maze the next time. So a behavior that's reinforced is more likely to occur the next time. Behavior that's punished is less likely to occur. So the brain areas that appear to be involved, one would be the amygdala, that fear learning that we already talked about, right? Because the amygdala is involved in certain emotional responses, fear potentially being one of them. Ventral tegmental area, or VTA, and the nucleus accumbens, those are the basic reward centers of the brain. And so those would be involved in the reinforcement aspect of operant conditioning. So we've already talked a little bit about the amygdala, and we'll talk about the VTA and the nucleus accumbens when we come back and talk about drugs and addiction at the end of this semester. Now, are classical and operant conditioning the only way we learn? Hopefully you had a resounding no, all right? There are other types. There's observational learning, there's latent learning, and then there's non-associative learning, okay? So we're going to talk in another video more about non-associative learning using the aplesia model, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more in another video about what is going on in the brain with long-term potentiation.